Hello everybody, thanks for joining us for our webinar this afternoon. Before we get started, I'm going to send out a quick poll for you to answer. We just want to know if you've already delivered our current version of the Food and Cookery V-Cert or if you're completely new to the subject. So I'm just going to send that out now. That should appear on your screen and you should be able to respond to that by clicking on the answer that applies to you. So I'll just leave that on there while we while we wait for a few people to dial in there. Right, okay then. Thank you for that. So we're at about 50-50 for who has had experience and who hasn't. That's really interesting to know. Thank you for that. So we'll do a few introductions before we start. My name's Karen Taylor. I work in the curriculum team here at NCFE. The role of the curriculum team is to support centres with the planning, delivery and assessment of the V-Cert qualifications. Our subject specialist who's going to be talking through the qualification with you today is Pauline Bland. Pauline's a subject specialist and is the lead external quality assurer or EQA for Food and Cookery. So are you there, Pauline?
Yes, I am. Hello, everybody.
Lovely. Great. So you can see on the screen our agenda for the session today. To start with, Pauline's going to give you an overview of the qualification before moving on to the individual units. Then we'll talk about the quality assurance of the qualification. You can see that there is a time at the end for questions, but please ask any questions that you've got throughout the session and we'll make time to answer them as we go. And you can do that by typing into the question pane, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. So I'm going to pass you over to Pauline and we'll make a start.
Right, hello everybody. I didn't quite catch how many of you have delivered the V-Cert before because my line went dead for a moment.
Oh,
for
sorry,
those of
Pauline.
You who
It was 50-50.
Yes,
50%.
50-50.
Yeah.
Right, so we've got a mix of people here. So obviously if you are familiar with the previous qualification, you'll find that, for example, the content has not really changed. The key change is focused around Unit 3, but I'll be going through each unit in any case, particularly for those people who it's completely new to. Now, the key thing to bear in mind about this new Level 1 and Level 2 in food and cookery skills is that it doesn't carry any performance points. So that's something that you have to be aware of. It carries 120 guided learning hours. It's available at Level 1 and Level 2, and they are separate qualifications. There is no automatic drop-down, for example. They are two separate qualifications. You can move your learners from Level 1 to Level 2, and vice versa, if you feel that they're on the wrong level. But if you do that, you do need to match their evidence against the assessment criteria that pertains to the level that they've moved to. Now, the big change, as I've said, is that all units are now internally assessed and externally quality assured. So in the past, we had Unit 3, which was an external assessment. That will also be internally assessed now alongside Unit 1, 2 and 4. This qual is really aimed at learners with an interest in food and cookery. There are no specific recommended prior learning requirements for the qualification. And really, we leave that up to you to make sure that your learners are on the right level and it is the right qualification for them. As I said, they can transfer, but you do need to make sure you map their evidence against the assessment criteria of the level that they've transferred onto. What we're looking at today, just to give you the example, is Level 2. The two levels are very similar in theme. Key themes run through Level 1 and Level 2 are the same, but obviously Level 2 is in more depth and breadth. So though we're only looking at 2, you'll have a good idea of the content of Level 1 as well. Okay, I think we're ready to go on to the next slide unless you've got any questions there.
There's no questions that have come through, but I've just put a poll out, Pauline, just to see if anybody was to go forward and deliver this qualification, which level would you be interested in? So that's on the screen there now. So at the minute we've got, again, it's a 50-50 split. We've got 50% Level 2 and 50% level 1 and 2. So thank you for responding to that. So I'll move on to the next screen here for you, Pauline.
Okay, so now
that's on there for you now. There.
Okay, we're going to look at Unit 1 first, and that unit is preparing to cook. And this is the obvious place to start. I think the thing to bear in mind about qualification is it's run in a very logical way. One unit builds upon the next. So it makes sense, and you really should start with Unit 1 and progress forward, because you'll see as we go through how the content develops from one unit to the next. So the first unit is about preparing, really developing their skills. So we expect you really to determine which dishes the learners are going to cook. We don't specify that, but what we do is we give you a list of the skills which are in the specifications, which tells you the range of things that they should be covering, like being able to bake, boil, fry, grill, saute, etc. But we don't say you've got to make spaghetti bolognese. We leave that up to you. But the key thing is you really are developing their practical skills in that first unit. Now, alongside that, obviously absolutely critical is that they are working in a safe and hygienic way, and that they can describe those practices, that they can be well aware of the different types of looking after the cooking environment as well, so they know how to manage that safely as well, and that they can look at the potential risks and hazards that they're going to be looking at when they come to look at Unit 1. But as you can see on that screen, you've got 4 units. The first one is preparing to cook, and that's the first learning outcome, and the learner will understand how to prepare itself and the environment for cooking. Learning outcome 2, prepare and store equipment and utensils. Learning outcome 3 will understand recipes for cooking, and learning outcome 4 will be able to use skills for food preparation and cooking. Now, for Unit 1, they need to cook a minimum of 6 dishes, 8 for Level 1, that demonstrate a range of skills, just as I mentioned to you, across the different bake, boil, fry, steam, etc. It's important that with the practical work that at least 3 of the 6 dishes need to be shown in detail and need to be annotated with photographs of the key stages of the dishes. That's really important, and we will expect to see that when we have a look at the work that your learners have been doing. For the Level 1, they have to cook 8 dishes, and you might think that's a little odd because obviously Level 1 is at a lower level, but it's really an acknowledgement that those learners perhaps need more practice to demonstrate their skills, and also that some of the dishes that they might cook are at a less level than some of the Level 2 learners, and you will see that they will have a different range of skills that they've got to cover, which again will be specified in the specifications.
Right. Okay. Are you happy with Unit 1 there, Pauline?
I'm just going to say a bit more about Unit Learning Outcome 2.
Right. Okay.
One of the key things that they've got to be able to do is to understand how to prepare and store equipment and utensils. And it's important that they get involved with both equipment and utensils, and that when they're describing that they are describing both. They've also got to show how they prepare those and clean and store them. And sometimes we've had the issue where some things get left off, like the storage. Each aspect is specified within the assessment criteria and must be covered, really. So that's really important. And then Learning Outcome 3, they've got to understand recipes for cooking, so they've got to know what the purpose of a recipe is. They've got to be able to identify the stages of a recipe, and they've got to be able to describe the purpose of different ingredients in a recipe. Sometimes you have a bit of confusion there, setting, gelatinization, that type of thing, aeration, thickening. So they are the purpose of the different ingredients. And then they've also got to be able to describe the cooking skills, which actually really relates to the method of cookery. So again, back to boiling, poaching, frying. They've got to show that they understand those different cooking skills. And then when we look at Unit 4, this is where they're going to be demonstrating all of those things that they've described. So they're going to have to show that they can work in a safe and hygienic manner, the same for the environment that they're working in, that they can follow recipes clearly with success, that they can demonstrate those range of cooking skills we've talked about. And that's why it's important that they're getting a good range of opportunity so that they can use those various cooking skills in the dishes that they choose, and perhaps embody maybe 1 or 2 or even sometimes 3 different cooking skills in a particular recipe. Know how to use the equipment safely as well as the utensils, and work in a safe and hygienic manner throughout. So they're the key things for Unit 1 across the 4 learning outcomes that they need to be really clear about, and you as the teacher also. The evidence we'll be looking for is that they have cooked a minimum of 6 dishes, that 3 are in detail with the annotated staged photographs for those 3 items. I think that's all on that slide, Karen, unless you've got some questions coming in.
No questions have come in yet, but if you do have anything, just type it into your question bar and we'll answer those as we'll work through today. So I'll just move on to Unit 2 there for you.
Okay, so Unit 2 is understanding food. And again, you've got 3 learning outcomes here. The first one being we'll understand the sources of food. The second one, the factors that affect food choices. And the third one, to be able to make informed choices when using food for cooking. And again, they have to cook a minimum of 6 dishes. But the key difference between Unit 1 and Unit 2 is that they should be able to show how they can amend and develop those recipes. So they're not just following a recipe, they're also amending and developing that. So if we look at learning outcome 1, the key things that they've got to include there is they've got to be able to describe the main food groups as in the Eat Well guide. They've got to be able to describe the sources of food from each main food group and map those back to the Eat Well guide. And they've got to show that they understand how seasons affect food availability in terms of things like price, nutritional content, flavour, etc. With learning outcome 2, they've got to be able to understand the factors that affect food choices. And there's quite a lot involved in this particular learning outcome because they've got to look at the social factors that affect food. They've got to be able to look at the environmental factors that affect food and also the sensory. So with the social, we're thinking of things like cultural, locality, accessibility, fair trade and personal. With environmental, we're looking at food miles, footprint, pesticides, the effect of weather, organic foods. And with the cost factors, availability, quality, variety, brands and composition. And then the sensory factors, taste, texture, appearance and smell. And you'll find that those things are specified on the range which appears in the specifications, and it's important that you cover those and that those things appear in the learner's evidence. So it's really important when you see the range statement. It helps you exemplify what's required by that particular learning outcome, but it also is for you to make sure that your learners embodying that really in their evidence. So then if we look at the next one, the learner will be able to make informed choices when using food for cooking. The learner really this is very much about comparing the different foods before they make their choice of dish that they're going to select and amend and develop. So for example, we specify in the specifications 3, which is a pasta dish, a meat dish, and a fruit dish. But we leave it up to you to identify what the other 3 might be. For example, egg-based or vegetarian or rice-based. That's up to you to decide. But the learner looks then at a range of pasta dishes, compares them, makes a decision. Like just say they're going to then choose a lasagna, and then they're going to make changes to that recipe to show that they have actually amended it and developed it. So they might make it meatless. They might make it change the main ingredient from meat to fish, which then might require them to change the sauce so that it is a pleasing, edible outcome. So they've got to be able to make sure they can do that. And they aren't sort of minuscule changes. So, for example, if they took a lasagna and they changed the main herb, we wouldn't see that as amending and developing a recipe. They've got to show that they understand how ingredients work within a recipe and how they can make those choices and changes but still end up with something that's a pleasing, edible outcome. And they're embodying some of the factors that we've talked about learning outcome too. So maybe they've looked at the food miles things have travelled and therefore have made changes in that way. So they're using what they've learned in learning outcome 1 and learning outcome 2 also to inform the types of changes they're making to their recipe. Key thing to remember is we don't require staged photographs for Unit 2, but they do need a final photograph of the dishes that they have amended and developed, because there's quite a lot of detail in showing the comparison and annotating the recipe to show how they've changed it, etc. So we don't require the staged photographs for Unit 2. Any queries on that unit?
No, we haven't had any questions come in yet. If you do think of anything, just type it in and we'll forward those on to Pauline for you this afternoon. So I'll just move on to Unit 3, the new unit there.
Okay, I'm just finding mine. Okay, yeah. So now this is the big change really. For those of you who are familiar with the VCERT, this is where the changes really are centred around, is Unit 3. And the key thing, obviously, is that we are no longer expecting learners to sit an external assessment for this. This unit will also be internally assessed like Units 1, 2 and 4. So Unit 3 is exploring balanced diet. It's a smaller unit in the sense that it's only got 2 learning outcomes, but they do have quite a lot of assessment criteria associated with each learning outcome. And the first one is the learner will understand the importance of a balanced diet, but you'll see that includes a range of things like making sure they can define a balanced diet, that they can describe all the nutrients that make up a balanced diet, that they explain nutrient requirements to different groups of people and can actually indicate what different groups of people might need in terms of their dietary requirements, that they can explain healthy eating advice, that they're familiar with the government healthy eating tips, that they are well aware of how the nutritional information on food labels can help inform healthy eating, and that they can look at a recipe and see how that might be changed to make it healthier. Sorry, I didn't mention this is learning outcome 2, that they can change the recipe to make it healthier, and that they can explain, once they've done that, how that might have made changes to the sensory factors of that particular recipe. So they've taken out a lot of fat, saturated fat, salt, sugar from a particular recipe. That will also change how that recipe tastes, its volume, its texture, and they've got to be able to identify that as well. Now, because this has always been an externally assessed assessment in the past, obviously there hasn't been a need for a practical to be involved in this, and that still is the case because the assessment criteria has not changed. So we've maintained the assessment criteria, but we've changed the method of assessment. And that's the key thing that I think you need to take on board, particularly if you've been familiar with the old VCERT. So what happens from here on with this qual is that they will do an internal assessment just like they will for Units 1, 2 and 4, and that will go into their portfolio just the same way. So what we've done with this in mind is we've already created a sample assessment task that you can use because you'll be no longer preparing them for the exam. The key thing I think to understand is because we haven't changed the assessment criteria, there isn't really a need to do any practical work linked to this unit if you choose not to. It doesn't mean to say that you can't, because if you want to sit alongside doing practical work, but the evidence and the assessment criteria is not linked to practical evidence. So that's something to bear in mind. If you have a look at the next slide where it shows you the sample assessment task, I think the easiest thing is for you to have a chance to read through this. It's across 2 slides, so we'll look at the first one initially. You can see the task is linked to certain AC. So the first task one is linked to assessment 1.1 to 1.4, and there's a scenario, and then you can see what learners are being expected to do. So we've used the same assessment criteria, created a task, and mapped the assessment criteria to the task. So I think if you have a look at that first task and the types of evidence that we've identified, and then we'll move on to the next part of it. But you may well have questions after this, because obviously this is new to you. So I'll give you a few minutes just to look at that. Are you there, Karen?
Yes, I'm here. I'm just leaving the screen on for everybody to have a look. Right, there's no questions come out about that, so I'll move on to task 2.
Okay.
So task 2.
So does that seem very straightforward, hopefully?
Hopefully.
For everybody. So have a look at task 2 now.
Yeah. There, we haven't had any questions in about task 2, Pauline. I don't know if you've got any comments on that. Shall I put task 3 on?
Just to say before we do move on to the next slide, that obviously this doesn't have to be done in one, it can be divided up over a period of time. So they're doing task 1, a time frame in which to do that, then they move on to the next task. It's not something that they have to do in one continuous thing, because obviously it covers the whole of the unit, and there will be the same number of hours devoted to this unit as the others. Okay, we can move on to the next one, Karen.
Right, so task 3's on there now. That's the last one, isn't it?
Yeah.
And just to say as well, they don't have to use this, do they, Pauline? We were just talking about this earlier.
Yes, I mean, this is something just like with the other units we've provided, which means that, you've got something there that you can use, that meets the assessment criteria, that takes a little bit of onus off you when perhaps you're not familiar with the qualification, that you can obviously choose to write your own, but you do need to make sure that it does map across the assessment criteria, because obviously when the EQA comes in and finds that wouldn't be the case, for example, then that would be of considerable concern, really. So it might be as well to get that checked if you're thinking of writing your own. And we do offer a checking unit. The first unit, I think, is free, and the second unit or subsequent units is £50 if you wanted to write your own. But my advice, I think, would be, particularly if you are new to the qualification, would be in the very first instance, use the one that's there, and thereafter you perhaps feel more confident in writing your own if you particularly want to. I mean, with the current visa, we do find that people tend to use the internal assessment tasks there, just because it makes life a little bit easier for them, and they know that they meet the necessary criteria.
Right, still no questions have come in, Pauline.
No.
I know.
I'm amazed.
I know, we normally get loads for food and cookery, don't we? So I'll put the Unit 4 information up on the screen here. So that's there now for you.
Okay. Yes, okay. So Unit 4 obviously is the final unit, and you'll see how this really builds on Unit 1 and 2 in terms of the learner's practical skills. So they've got to plan and produce dishes in response to a brief, and it's across 3 learning outcomes. And the key thing that they've got to do is to make sure that they choose 2 dishes, which must either be a starter and a main course, or a main course and a dessert. It's not appropriate for them to cook things like biscuits or a cake. There has to be something that you would say, yes, this is definitely a starter, this is a main course, or this is a dessert. They don't actually have to provide accompaniments alongside the main course, and that's because what we're wanting them to do is to embody sufficient skills base into their choice of dishes. So they shouldn't be choosing some of the basic dishes that they did earlier on. They should be trying to show off and demonstrate all the skills that they've now learned over the duration of this course. So it's really important that it's stressed to the learner that this is an opportunity to showcase the skills that they've learned over the period of time that they've been taking the course, really. So the first learning outcome is they have to be able to plan a menu for a set brief. So again, there is a brief that you can use, and that's what they follow. A lot of centres currently do change the brief, and that's fine for this one. I think it's a lot more straightforward, as long as it still embodies a starter, main course, or main course and dessert. So you can't say to them, oh, you're going to cook some cakes for a bake sale and show your different skills in a range of different cakes that you've learned to make. It must be based around the starter, main course, or main course and dessert. So they've got to be able to assess the requirements of that brief. They've got to be able to select a menu of dishes that are appropriate, and then they've got to be able to develop a plan of action to make those dishes. And that plan of action at level 2 has to be looked at then by their teacher, by their peers, and they have to be given some feedback on it, and then they have to go away and revise and review that time plan based on the feedback they've received. And when we look at the evidence, we expect to see both time plans plus the feedback within the learner's portfolio. And we really do expect to see dovetailing, so we don't want the two dishes cooked in a linear fashion. We want them to show that they understand that, for example, if they were using a yeast-based good, that they started that early because of the proving time, etc., and then they went on to do something else, perhaps a pastry or something that needed to be set, and they show that they can actually dovetail. They've got to be able to, in learning outcome 2, they've got to be able to make sure, obviously, that they can make and prepare the dishes on the menu. We'll be expecting, obviously, as I've said, a good skills base. They've got to be able to show that they can prepare themselves and their environment appropriately, that they apply the plan to make the dishes. So the plan should be realistic. It's not just a theoretical exercise. They've got to be applying that plan. And so the timings, etc., should be appropriate to the dishes that they've chosen. And they've got to be able to demonstrate the cooking skills to make the dishes on the menu and to make sure that everything is obviously edible, pleasing results with a good standard. And then with learning outcome 3, they've got to review the menu and the completed dishes. So they've got to assess the strengths and weaknesses of the menu, the strengths and weaknesses of the planning and the preparation process, and the strengths and weaknesses of the completed dishes, and then evaluate how the brief generically has been met. So that's quite a demanding task, but what we have found is most centres really enjoy this particular unit because it does give the learner that opportunity to showcase their skills. And really, we would expect that they are really showing a good range of skills and not choosing basic dishes. And we certainly wouldn't expect to see sort of composite dishes where they're just, mixing a range of ingredients together as in a cold dish. That wouldn't really be deemed to have enough skills base. You do need to make sure that the learner has photographic evidence of the two dishes at the key stages of the two dishes that they've chosen, and that those photographs have been annotated, because that forms a key part of their evidence. And it's also supported by a teacher observation report, so that the teacher is also giving a commentary as to how the learner has performed. But bear in mind that the teacher observation report is there to substantiate the learner evidence, not to replace it. So it doesn't mean that, that in itself is sufficient evidence. It's there to support the learner evidence. Any query on that one?
Yes, we have had a question in about Unit 4. How long do they have to make the 2 dishes?
They have 2 hours. I should have said that, so beg your pardon. Yes, 2 hours to complete the 2-course menu.
And they both have to be
And
done
that
together?
includes, yes, they must be cooked within a 2-hour continuous period, and they can't do, say, half an hour of mise en place beforehand in terms of getting things ready, and then say, right, now the 2 hours starts. They get 2 hours to weigh the ingredients, obviously get themselves ready, collect their equipment and all that type of thing, and they have 2 hours in which to do it. And as I said, bear in mind, we don't require accompaniments with the main course, so it's a main item and a dessert. And though we want to see a good range of skills in, they certainly should be able to do that within that 2-hour time frame.
Right, that's great. Thanks, Pauline. We haven't had any more questions in.
Other question?
That's it. So
Okay.
I'll put, we've got the internal assessment screen on now for everybody to have a look at.
With the grading criteria.
That's right, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so what you're seeing there is just an example, and this is for Unit 1, and it shows you the grading descriptors that you have to use when you're assessing and grading the learner work. So the idea is that first of all you look for the pass criteria, and if all of that has been met, then you move on to the merit criteria. If all of that has been met, you move on to distinction. But as soon as you get to the stage where you think, oh no, it doesn't meet the merit criteria on one of the assessment criteria, then obviously that's not a merit. You know you can stop then. So there you can see the grading criteria on the screen. As I said, that's for Unit 1 that's shown there. And it's important that you do refer to the grading criteria when you're actually assessing the work. All assessment criteria must be met to achieve a pass, and the grades are not yet achieved, pass, merit or distinction. Now, unlike the previous version of the qualification, the grading of the internal assessment will no longer follow the mastery model. So in other words, currently, if they get a pass for any one assessment criteria, their overall unit grade is a pass, even if they have merits and distinction across some of the other assessment criteria. That's no longer going to be the case. What is key is they still have to pass each assessment criteria as a minimum. But then the change is going to be that the assessment criteria grades are going to be aggregated, which will give you an overall unit grade, and that's the change also that's happened from the previous research to this. And I think Karen's going to show you how that might happen using the calculator that will be available for you to make sure that you come out with an accurate grade where there has been aggregation within the unit. But bear in mind, they must at least have a pass for each. An NYA will lead to an NYA.
That's right. So I'm just going to try and come out of this PowerPoint now. And I do have the grading calculator here. So what I want to point out here, this is available for you to download from the website now on the Food and Cookery Skills qualification page. But it's really important, once you open this Excel spreadsheet, you will be met with this page here that's on the screen, and unlike I did, you will have to actually read these instructions and follow them. So what you need to do first of all to get this to work is you need to go into this overall grade tab at the bottom, and that's where you add your learners. So you can see I've added myself there as a learner. At the minute I've got a grade for Unit 1, Unit 2 and Unit 4. And because I haven't achieved all 4 units, there's still, my overall grade is still a not yet achieved. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to enter the learner grade and how that will be aggregated. So if I go down to the bottom here, to the tab for Unit 3, and what will happen automatically is any names that you put into this overall grade bit at the front here will be pulled through to the Unit 3. Now what I did, as did quite a few people here when we were testing, is we went straight to the units and tried to type in a learner there, and it wouldn't work. So it does have to be through the overall grade screen first. So once you've got your learner in, you can then use the drop down to select which grade they got for which AC. So for this one here, there isn't a distinction available. There's only a pass or merit. So I'll enter my grade there. This one's pass, merit or distinction. I'll just pick random grades across here, and you can see that this unit grade here isn't changing, and that won't change until I have a grade entered for all of them. So I'm just going to work my way along. You can see this one here. Again, there's no distinction, so I'll have a merit there. And then I'll put a merit in here. So you can see there that I now, because I've got something in each unit, each assessment criteria, you can see my overall grade is now a pass. Now, as with the current VCERTs, learners get 2 attempts with their internal assessment, so they do get a chance to resubmit. So at this point, you could use this calculator almost like a motivational tool. You could say if you come through and maybe improve that to a merit. You can see now that my overall grade's gone up to a merit just by addressing that one assessment criteria. So that might be just the little push that the learner needs. So if I go back to my overall grade there, I now do have a merit overall. If I just go back to Unit 3, and if I change this one back to a pass, I just want to see, you can see there that it does weigh on a positive towards the higher grade. So although I've got 2 passes and 2 merits, it is still a merit overall. And this is also available in the specification. There's a chart in the specification that shows you how to calculate the final learner grade, which I believe we're going to look at in a second as well. So I'll just go back to the slideshow here. So did you have anything else you wanted to say about the internal assessment there, Pauline?
No, I think I covered everything, unless anybody's got any questions. I mean, I think the point that you made, Karen, obviously you get 2 attempts, which is really key, so that the learner can add to their work after the first cycle of internal quality assurance. Well, first of all, the assessment and grading, the internal quality assurance and the external quality assurance process is complete. A learner then can resubmit that work, either to get it up to it's not at pass level, or to improve the grade from a pass to a merit or a merit to a distinction. And then we would sample those learners that had added to their work at the second visit, along with the other 2 units that we were sampling for the first time.
Yeah. Right, okay, I'm going to move on now to the IQA organisation chart. This is more for people who don't have experience with VCERTs or any of our NCFE qualifications. As Pauline mentioned there about IQA, your internal quality assurance. So once you've set the tasks and the learners have completed some work, they'll hand that in to you to be assessed. And then you'll need an IQA, an internal quality assurer, to sample your work and how you've assessed the work. So regardless of which VCERT or which qualification you're delivering, you will need that IQA and you'll need a plan in place. So you can see on this slide what the ideal IQA structure would look like, but we do realise that this isn't always the case because many of our subjects, in particular food and cookery, have small cohorts and we often come across single person departments. What we would advise is that the person who will be carrying out the internal quality assurance role is occupationally competent, and we do offer IQA and assessor training sessions too if you feel like that would be necessary. They are chargeable resources, and you will find details of any upcoming sessions on the events page of the website. So on this screen here it explains in a bit more detail the external quality assurance process. So you've set your internal assessment, your learners have submitted their evidence and you've graded the work. Your learner at that point doesn't get any feedback until all of the quality assurance process has been completed. So once your IQA has been completed, you would then submit your grades to the portal. Then next would come your EQA visit. So as 4 units are being externally quality assured now, it does probably make sense for the first visit to encompass unit 1 and 2, and for the second visit to cover units 3 and 4. Your EQA is allocated to you when you first register your learner, and we do recommend that you register your learners as soon as possible so that you can get in touch and get support regarding the qualification content from your EQA, and you can always plan in your visits then as well. When you submit your grades, your EQA gets an automatic notification email, and we hope that you'll already have a date arranged as part of your planning, but if you haven't, then get in touch and sort a mutually convenient time. But please remember that they do often have a lot of centres to cover, so they won't be able to fit in visits at short notice. At the visit, your EQA is basically doing what your IQA has done, so sampling your learners' work, looking at feedback to the learners, and they'll also look at the IQA feedback to the assessor. So is the feedback supportive? Have they agreed grades? What discussions taken place? If they aren't in agreement, that kind of thing. They discuss with you whether they agree the grades or not. If they do, those grades are banked. This means at this point that this is the learner's first submission. So then you can give the learners the work back with summative feedback. And if needs be, the learner can resubmit if a higher grade's wanted. So that's where that grading calculator comes in. If the EQA doesn't agree, they'll discuss clearly with you why this is the case. It might be that you've marked too harshly or too leniently, and what they'll do then is reject the grades on the portal, and then you will resubmit the grades agreed by your EQA, but that's still classed as your first submission. So if the learners want to resubmit, then the process is repeated with the work being sampled at the second visit. So if, like was suggested, you had units 1 and 2 looked at in your first visit, when your EQA comes back to look at units 3 and 4, they could sample any resubmissions from units 1 and 2. So this next screen here just shows the same sort of chart there for calculating the overall learner grade. So this is basically the information that we looked at from the grading calculator there. Now I can see that we haven't had any more questions that have come in. Pauline, have you got anything that you would like to add before we finish this afternoon?
Yes, just something that you were saying about the IQA,
Yeah.
Karen. I think one of the things that we often find, because as you said, sometimes there's only one specialist within the department, and you know, we often think that the EQA is there to support the assessor, which is very true, but they are also there to support the IQA, and that's often very important when they perhaps are only occupationally knowledgeable or they're new to the role. So I think it's really important that the centre are aware that the support from their EQA is not just for the assessor, but also the IQA, and they would normally be at the visit when the EQA is at the centre to receive the feedback, because obviously some of the feedback is specific to the EQA, to the IQA, just as it is to the assessor. So it's important that they have that dialogue with the EQA as well, and develop a relationship and look for support and help where they, where they feel they need it.
Great. Right. Okay then. So I'm going to put on the screen here our contact details. Now, what I'll do tomorrow is I'll send out an email to everybody who's attended this afternoon. I'll include in that email a copy of the slides that we've used this afternoon. And I'll also arrange for a recording of the webinar to be uploaded to YouTube so that you can watch it again or view it with any colleagues who you think might have found it useful. But in the meantime, if you've got any questions at all, you can direct them to any of those email addresses on the screen there. I'm part of the curriculum team, which is the email address at the top. So we haven't had any more questions in, so I think we'll just finish there and say good afternoon. And thank you to Pauline for supporting this afternoon.
Thank you for all coming along and listening.
Yes, thank you.